Okay, welcome to Ireb podcast number 20. Today we're meeting with some folks from Moms Demand Action. Bob Mokos and Erin Preese are both with us today. Hi, Bob. Erin, how are you guys?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
It's good. It's good to have you guys on. So the first thing I like to do, and I'll introduce you guys. Now, Erin, I know really well. Erin and I have been working together on a number of projects, and I wanted to try to see if I couldn't mentally go over that. So there was the gun. Well, we go back before that, but the big one that we worked on that I'm really quite proud of was the one down in Lakeville, the Moms Demand Action thing with the gun vigil, the speaker, and we got hundreds of people who stood out for a couple hours and just brutal cold, because
that was after the Parkland high school shooting last winter, and we organized several different groups in the area, and we all worked together to make a really meaningful event. It
was a powerful event. And I think, as I look back over the resistance of the first 2 years, that was one of the most powerful events I think we organized down here. And I thank you for that. So I wanted to kind of get a chance to get to know both of you guys. So Bob and Erin, Bob, why don't you get started? Tell us a little bit about yourself and, your involvement, and then we'll move on to Erin. Just some personal stuff, if you would.
I'll try to keep this short because basically it's why I'm involved, right? I'm originally from Chicago. I'm from a family of 7 children. 5 of them were sisters. And what happened as a kid, I was involved on a rifle team, so I learned how to shoot a rifle as a child and handle weapons. And I learned from people who were NRA qualified people to instruct and teach safety. And I ended up becoming a sharpshooter, NRA qualified sharpshooter, because we shot at all these events that were NRA sponsored. As life went on, I ended up going into the Air Force, and from there, I became a pilot for Northwest Airlines. And at that time frame, I had a sister who was murdered in Chicago. She was exiting her car before she went into a church, and somebody came up and put a pistol to her temple and pulled the trigger, and she was dead instantly. Later, a few years later, about 15 years later, the World Trade Center happened, 2001, 9/11. And shortly after that, they started armed pilots in the cockpit. So I applied for that and became a federal flight deck officer, where I was qualified to carry a gun in the cockpit. Because I flew international, I never did it because no other country wants us to bring our guns in there. Unless you're a federal air marshal, you can't bring a gun. So I never really carried in the cockpit, but I did go through all the safety training with that. And so I retired in 2010, and 2 years after I retired, Sandy Hook happened. And I thought for sure that something would be done about gun violence at that point, with 91% of the people in the country trying to get criminal background checks on all gun sales, something simple and common sense like that. I thought for sure our Congress would pass it. And they didn't. And it just infuriated me. I mean, who did not cry when that Sandy Hook happened? And so I figured that if Congress wasn't going to do anything, that I would. And so I resolved to get involved, and I searched around all the gun safety groups. There was the Brady group that was been around for a while, but now this is shortly after what Gabby Giffords too is about that same time frame. And so I looked at the Giffords group, and I saw Everytown for Gun Safety, which evolved out of the Sandy Hook shooting. And I applied for and became a fellow for them. So that's what I'm doing. And in that role as a fellow, I work very closely with Moms Demand Action, and have actually joined Moms Demand Action and I'm part of them, and work with people like Erin, who's a rock star in the organization.
Oh, Bob, that's an amazing. It's a compelling story, and I hope to hear a little bit more about it. Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. Well, I grew up in New Prague, Minnesota, which has a really strong hunting culture. My dad was a hunter. He still owns guns. Most of my family are hunters and very responsible with guns. So I never felt uncomfortable around guns growing up or anything. They didn't mean anything in relationship to violence, really, to me in my experience. But I was a senior in high school when Columbine happened. And I remember just feeling shocked that something like that could happen in a high school in our country. And then eventually I grew up and moved out and moved over to Minneapolis. I lived there about 10 years, and during that time, there was a lot of gun violence in my neighborhood. And at some points, I even had to lay down on the floor in my living room because the gunshots were so close.
And you
I
have
lived there.
children.
Yes. Yeah. My older daughter was 2.5 when we decided to move because we didn't want her growing up in a home and having to teach her that if you hear this sound, it means you need to lay down on the floor or lay down on the sidewalk if you're at the park. So we moved to a suburb. It's much safer. There's not gun violence in our streets here, but we do have a really high suicide rate in the suburbs and in rural Minnesota as well. But I found that my kids still really are affected by gun violence. When they play school, they end up playing lockdown drill. And as a teacher, I have to do lockdown drills with my students 5 times a year. As a new teacher, I actually had to go through a active shooter drill with the police department in one of the high schools where they shot off blanks from a rifle and an AR-15. And that was to teach the teachers how to tell where the sound was coming from and how far away it was so we could decide if we should run. It was hide, flee, or fight. Those are our 3 choices that we're trained in. And I just think it's horrifying that we've come to this point as a country that we haven't done anything about gun violence legislatively. And so now our teachers are having to be trained and our children are having to be trained on how to survive mass shootings. And I've just reached a point where I had to do something about it.
That's quite a story as well. I mean, to give a little background, I'm a resident of Minnesota. I was raised in the hunting culture myself. I grew up in the city, but I spent most of my spare time out in the woods hunting and fishing. And I was a Boy Scout. I was trained to shoot by the NRA as a young Boy Scout. As a matter of fact, they were sponsoring the range or the shooting activity at the time. Erin, you still must be connected to some of those folks. And as you reach back to them and you talk about this and you talk about these, horrific things like Sandy Hook, and we talk about let's do something that makes sense. I mean, this is the thinking of the majority of people, isn't it? I mean, I have to believe that most people believe in this common sense approach.
Mm-hmm. They actually do. Whenever I start talking about the gun issue, people always say, oh, you're so brave to talk about it because it's so controversial and it's so divisive. But I found that it's really not. The latest polls show that 97% of Americans agree that we should have background checks on all gun sales. I mean, there's nothing else that 97% of Americans agree on, but this is something that we do agree on. The other thing is that polls have shown that 88% of gun owners support background checks, and even 77% of NRA members support common sense gun laws like background checks. So almost everyone I've talked to does agree that it makes sense to have certain reasonable laws in place just to make sure that people are being safe.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience too. Is people want what makes sense, and this is something that does make sense. Well, let's talk a little bit about Moms Demand Action right now, and talk a little bit about Everytown. What are those organizations, and what kind of work do they do?
Sure. Well, Moms Demand Action and the Everytown for Gun Safety Network, they're partner organizations. We work together. I'll just explain the mom side of it, and then maybe Bob can talk about the survivor side for Everytown. But basically, Moms Demand Action was founded by a woman named Shannon Watts right after the Sandy Hook shooting. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she thought there must be something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, but for gun violence. So she started a Facebook page, and it just kind of went viral right away. People were really interested. So they joined up with another group called Mayors Against Illegal Guns and formed the Everytown Network. And basically the way I think of it is everyone here in the Moms Demand Action Group, we're all volunteers. All of us volunteer our time in Minnesota. We do have some people in the Everytown Network that are on staff to help us with legislative issues. But basically, we're just working on common sense gun safety laws. We're not against guns. We're not trying to take anyone's guns away. We just want people to be safe and prevent violence. And this summer, we actually reached our 5 million member mark. So it's grown tremendously in 6 years, and we're very happy that it's just gaining so much momentum.
Bob, talk a little bit about your fellowship and the Everytown Network.
Right. The way I look at it is Everytown for Gun Safety is like the mothership. And underneath it is Moms Demand Action, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and also the Everytown Survivor Network. And the Survivor Network is anybody who is shot or had a loved one shot, participates in it and considered survivors. And within that group, I applied for and became a fellow for them. So you go to Washington, D.C. and get more training to be able to talk to people like yourself or speak in front of groups. I want to touch, if you don't mind, you mentioned something on the NRA. You said you got safety training from the NRA, as well as I did. Let's remember that the NRA used to be a gun safety and sportsman organization. And it changed. It changed in 1977 when this extreme leadership got control of them in their national meeting. And they've been in control since. And now it's become basically a lobbying arm for the gun manufacturing lobby.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about what it used to be.
Yeah, I didn't mean to diverse there, but I thought that was an important point.
Yeah, thank you. And because they are kind of topical when it comes to gun safety, and I don't care, or I don't want anybody to comment on it, but the Russian thing and the NRA and the money, I hope that we get some more clarity there going forward. But anyway,
well, I got to think that those are two different agendas. Russia has their agenda, and the NRA have theirs, and.
Yeah, somehow there was a door open, though, between the two, and I'm wondering how that all worked out. Yeah. So currently, you guys, what's the focus in Minnesota right now? We did some good work in the last 2 years. We flipped the House. We won all the state legislative, the state constitutional offices, and we're in pretty good shape. We don't have the Senate, and so I imagine, we've probably got some focus there. Where are we going?
Well, Erin, can I talk about this right now? I know that right now I'm going to meet with my state senator here at the first week of February, just to lay the groundwork, because we're going to go back in March, and Erin will be addressing that, I'm sure. But I've been asked by the Moms Leadership Group to set up a meeting with my state senator, who is not what I would consider a gun sense candidate, and we're trying to massage him and bring him over to our side. And maybe with the results of this election, we'll have some success, but he might see their handwriting on the wall.
Awesome. Well, and so what other things that we've got coming up? I mean, we've got a lot of work going on. I mean, we're in a pretty good place right now. What are you working on, Erin?
So we're actually a nonpartisan organization. We will support candidates or lawmakers of any party who are willing to work for gun safety legislation. And what we're working on right now is our main two priorities are criminal background checks on all gun sales in Minnesota. A lot of people assume that we do already have that, but it's actually only required if you choose to go to a federally licensed arms dealer, such as like a sporting goods store. Then you do have to have a background check, which takes about 90 seconds on a computer. But if you choose to go to a gun show or arrange an online sale or a private sale, then there's no background check required at all. And we believe it's about 25% of gun sales in Minnesota happen without any type of background check at all. And it's perfectly legal. So that's our main focus right now. And the reason why we focus on the background checks so much is because in other states that have passed this law, they've shown that gun violence decreases by about 50% across the board. So it's very effective. And we really would like to see that happen here in Minnesota. The other priority bill that we're working on is passing red flag protective orders. And that is the type of bill that is associated with the Parkland, Florida shooting, where there were signs that the shooter was going to become violent and that people had called the police with concerns. But if there's not a red flag law in place in that state, the police cannot do anything to stop the person. They can't step in because guns are considered personal property.
So that's a sticky thing. How does that work? I mean, because I ask that question a lot. Families and people who know other people, sometimes you just kind of get a sense, and that's something that I think both sides. People are saying, well, we should be policing our own whatever, but you can't do it without some authority to take those kinds of actions.
Right. And actually in Minnesota, we have a disproportionately high rate of suicide too. And red flag laws would help with that as well, because if a family member does have a concern that a person might harm themselves or someone else, they can call the police And they would still need a judge's order, so there still is due process, but they would be able to temporarily remove the guns from someone's home. Usually it's about 3 to 5 days. We don't know the specifics yet because that legislation isn't written, but they would temporarily remove the guns in time for the person to get some help. It's just to step in temporarily. Eventually the person can get their guns back. But it's just a way of family members being able to step in and say, let's stop for a minute and get you some help.
Well, yeah, and I want to actually back up a second too, and I didn't mean to imply that you were supportive of the Democrats over one party over the other. It just, in my experience, I find them most reasonable because I'm, our organization as well is nonpartisan, but we do caucus with them a lot because we find them to be most reasonable on this issue. That actually kind of begs the question, are we going to find some, people from both sides that we can talk to on this?
It does sort of fall down party lines, but not always. So last year, for instance, there was a bipartisan bill in the Senate that was for background checks, and there were actually 2 Republican senators that co-signed that bill. So there has been some bipartisan support. And also because all the lawmakers and candidates saw that Moms Demand Action volunteers were out door knocking, phone banking, handing out literature and talking to voters all summer and fall before this election. They know the power that moms volunteers have now, and they know that they need to listen to us because we are representing the majority of their constituents.
Well, that's so true. Actually, it just occurred to me. I've been on so many moms functions. I don't have a T-shirt yet, so I'm gonna have to.
I can get you one.
All right, I take a size large.
All right.
Can I define the problem just a little bit? And
please do. Yes.
You're 25 times more likely in this country to be shot than in any other socioeconomic country. We're up there with the Finland, Scandinavia, Germany, Western Germany, Japan, Australia. You're 25 times more likely in this country to be shot. 96 people a day die at the hands of a gun. With hundreds more injured throughout the country every single day. Now the Parklands and the Sandy Hooks, the Orlandos and the Las Vegases and the San Bernardinos, they tear at the consciousness of the country. But to each individual family every day, that's their Sandy Hook. This here was my Sandy Hook. This is Diane, and we lost her. All right. Now to show you how out of whack things are. Last year, when Erin McQuaid held that sit-in at the state capitol, I went down the next morning to thank her, and I had this around my neck on one of those, lanyards. And I went up in the gallery, and he wouldn't let me in the gallery because I had this picture. He said, "You can't bring a picture in." I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Just think of the irony here. If I had a gun, I can go in that gallery." Because you can carry a gun in the Capitol, but I couldn't carry a picture of someone who was murdered. That's how wacko it is.
That's what they think is dangerous too.
Yeah.
All right. So what do we see, Erin? We were talking about the similarities of being nonpartisan. One of the things that we like to do in Ireb is to educate, just like Moms Demand Action does. What do you guys see as when you're out working with people? Where do you see the light bulbs going on? What's working and waking folks up and educating them, to wake up to common sense ideas?
Well, we actually have kind of 2 branches in how we go about our education piece of this. One of them is talking to people like you and going to private house parties and events and just having a conversation about what the gun laws currently are and the types of gun laws that we would want to have to increase our safety. And Bob and I actually team up pretty often, and we go around and speak at different events about this. And we found, even in places that in more rural Minnesota where there are tons of gun owners, they almost always end up agreeing with the safety issues that we were hoping for. Go ahead.
Are they relieved when you say you're not there to melt their guns?
Yeah, they at first, sometimes you can tell they're like, well, what do you want? They're kind of looking into it, like, how far are you going here? And we just say, we're fine with responsible gun ownership. That's not the issue. The issue is people with dangerous histories getting their hands on guns who shouldn't have them in the first place. And the reason why, the way that we prevent that is by background checks. And also closing the loopholes in things like people who are convicted of stalking right now, there's a loophole and they can still buy guns. So it's those domestic violence, dating type relationships that have had a lot of loopholes in the gun laws too. So we'd like to close those as well.
I found that people are very, very much in agreement with the way where we stand on this, especially with the criminal background checks. I mean, that's a no-brainer to everybody. But the problem is that other issues, our society has become so desensitized to shootings that many of them don't even make the news. If I were to ask you how many mass shootings we've had to date of this year, I don't know if anybody can guess how many. I can tell you what it is. I just looked it up. Based on gunviolencearchive.org, we've had 18 mass shootings in the United States so far this year.
So that's a horrific number. And I know that, all those numbers, it's a horrific number with the violence that we're undergoing and the inculcation of violence into our culture to keep it going is just, it's wrong.
It's based on an unofficial 4 or more shot, not including the shooter. So it's an unofficial number that the FBI uses.
All right. Well, I've enjoyed talking to both of you guys thoroughly, and so what I want to know is, I'm listening and I want to get involved, and I want to know what you guys got coming up. So let's talk a little bit about that before we finish up.
Okay. Well, if someone's interested in getting involved, we would love to come and talk with you. If you want to host a private event at your home or your place of worship, Bob and I go on tour all the time for this and talk with people, or you can have one of our other speakers or survivors come to speak with your group. We also do Be Smart parties, which is focused just on keeping kids safe around guns. So that's talking about how to store weapons safely so that kids don't get them. And then also how to talk with other parents before your kids go on play dates about whether there are firearms kept in the home, and if so, how they're stored. That's a really important piece because a lot of times teen suicide and unintentional shootings just happen very quickly. And so it all depends on how the weapons are stored. So you could host an event like that. If you'd like to get involved with some of our legislative issues, you can text ACT to 64433, and that will get you connected with our network, and we'll let you know when there's events coming up. We'll text you when there's legislation starting to move, and then we can connect you really quickly to your lawmakers. We also have our biggest event of the year is our Advocacy Day, which is Wednesday, March 13th at the Capitol this year. Last year we had hundreds of people. I think it was was it 400 or 500 people at the Capitol? We train you on how to speak with your lawmakers about these issues. And then we also will make appointments for you to go and actually meet with your state senator and House representative. And we will be meeting at 9:00 in the Capitol Rotunda. So if you're interested in that, you can also check out our website, which is momsdemandaction.org. We'd love to have as many people there as possible. We're also going to be having another March for Our Lives on March 23rd. That's still in the planning stages, but that's coming. And then every year, the first weekend of June is our National Wear Orange Day, which is where we have events across the country, really, to raise the issue of gun violence and raise awareness of it.
I wore orange slacks at the state convention last year for that.
Oh, great.
Yeah. This is great. And I'll be sharing all of those links with folks in post-production, as soon as we get well, I want to thank both of you guys for coming on this.
Can I just have a few closing words? If you don't mind?
Certainly, Bob. Yes, please do. I'm sorry.
I want to just piggyback on Erin on all those events. I know I'll be there, and I want to self-disclose. I'm also a gun owner. And this isn't about taking a gun away from anybody. This is about making sure that guns don't fall into the hands of people who shouldn't have them. We have to take the steps that we know have been proven to work. And there is no holy grail that's going to solve the whole problem. So I agree with Erin. I would also ask people to join the organization. And she mentioned the 64433. If you were to text the word join to that, you would learn a little bit about Everytown. So
I agree with that. I think everyone should join that organization and start supporting it, because we have to support common sense ideas. We have to band together and stand up for the stuff that we all know is the right way to do things. And it's just time, you know.
And you don't have to be a mom.
No, you don't have to be a mom. And
Man enough to be a mom.
That's right. That's right. We can all support this organization. It's a fine organization, and I want to say that I've been proud of working with it in our space over these last 2 years, and I look forward to continuing our work together. So thanks, guys.
I'm in awe of the moms. I'll tell you that right now. Erin has heard this. I am in awe of them.
Yeah, but
they don't want to join the fraternity I belong to, and they're doing it for a really good reason.
yeah, moms has got a lot of respect. I gotta, you guys are doing the right thing, and people pay attention to that kind of thing. So keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Erin.